A South Korean delegation representing President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol is currently in the US to coordinate bilateral interests ahead of the country's presidential inauguration on May 10th. For more, I have Professor Kim Yeon-wook from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Professor Kim, it's good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
I also have Professor Im In-jung at Koongju National University joining this session virtually. Professor Im, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Professor Kim, we'll start here then. Let's start with a few words on perhaps your thoughts on the purpose of the current visit to the US by the South Korean delegation representing President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol.
I think the foremost important issue is to bolster and restore the US-South Korea alliance. The alliance itself has been transformed into a comprehensive strategic alliance in the year 2008. But ever since then, it didn't really substantially realized. I mean, the comprehensive strategic alliance means that the alliance, which has been focusing on the Korean Peninsula, should be enlarged into regional and global level alliance. But it didn't happen because, South Korea had to think about its relationship with China. And also for the last, maybe for a decade, Trump government did not really care about the alliance itself. And the two countries commonize the threat perception really didn't exist. South Korean government was thinking North Korea not as a threat, but more as a partner to negotiate in dialogue. And the United States was thinking that China is more important threat for the alliance to deal with. So I think at this time, it's very important that two countries get together to commonize their strategic objectives, to commonize what are their common threats. So kind of commonizing the threat perceptions, all those kind of things are something that we need to reshuffle to restore the alliance.
Right, and hence this particular trip to the US then. Meanwhile, Professor Im, the incoming South Korean administration has pledged a hardline stance against North Korea's displays of defiance. Can we expect President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's North Korea policy to perhaps be a radical departure from that of President Moon's?
Well, I want to be more cautious with my own wording because, of course, we all know the President Moon's approach was so-called the peace regime building in the Korean Peninsula. So the current government has prioritized, emphasized the importance of dialogues and appreciated any chance of starting negotiations. The incoming government, I don't think they're gonna ignore those kind of importance of the dialogues and the negotiations. But probably two main things can be different between the current government and the new one. Number one is the upcoming new government gonna more emphasize the so-called deterrence capability of South Korea. Because as long as North Korea's that nuclear capability has functioned as a huge bargaining chips, South Korea's position has been more like marginalized. So in that sense, the new government will think about very seriously about the importance of the deterrence capability. And second difference, we're going to be probably bottom-up approach. Bottom-up here means rather than a top-down approach done by for example, President Trump, and the South Korean government too. Different from that, the new probably government will respect more like a professional experts, the career diplomats, their voices too. So I think those two things can be pretty different between the current one and the new one.
Right. Now, Professor Kim, Professor Im just mentioned North Korea's nuclear ambitions. And having said that, how might North Korea respond to calls by South Korea and the US for complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization?
I think that term is very sensitive to North Korea. Of course, Trump government also called it as, final and fully verified denuclearization, which is very much similar to CVID, but later on when Trump was negotiating with Kim Jong-un, the concept itself changed to complete denuclearization, which is a very vague term. But from experts' point of view, when one country denuclearizes itself, first one they have to deal with is declaring what are the boundaries of nuclear weapons that needs to be denuclearized. So declaration is something we need to deal with. And then as the process of freezing and process of dismantling goes on, you know, inspectors had to go in and check out whether that process has been genuinely done. That is the, that is what verification is about. So the term verification, though, is very sensitive to North Korea because North Korea thinks that that's the act of violation of its sovereignty. So I'm not sure if North Korea is willing to accept the verification. I don't think so. But you know, South Korean new government calling it as CVID means that its policy towards North Korea is very much principled. The way to denuclearize North Korea should be done by principle very rigorously, which I don't think is very happy for Kim Jong-un.
I see. And Professor Kim, what then are the chances perhaps of an unrelenting confrontation then between North Korea and the US, especially in light of the current geopolitical events?
I think the two countries' relationship seems like pretty much a standoff for a while because, you know, Kim Yo-jong, her response when the defense minister mentioned about the preemptive strike was very much negative. So I think maybe Kim Yo-jong and North Korea is very unhappy about the new government's positions and the North Korea-US dialogue not going very well. But one thing we need to think about is, Kim Yo-jong mentioned about the nuclear state of North Korea and later on talked that, North Korea is not the target to be retaliated target of North Korean military strike. So I think maybe North Korea is also fearful of a very hawkish policy by South Korea and by the United States, and maybe wants some kind of talk and dialogue to be open with the United States. Maybe in this case, it's not a unilateral denuclearization of North Korea, but something that's related to the mutual arms control between the US and North Korea.
Right, and staying with Kim Yo-jong's remarks, Professor Im, how do you explain North Korea's recent rhetoric directed at South Korea through Kim Yo-jong?
Well, that's complicated because, again, Kim Yo-jong's comment used to be very hawkish. Literally, it was too much, but it sounds like they are trying to adjust the level too. Well, I think it does imply several things. First and foremost, probably, of course, the new government gonna be, of course, more hawkish or more like a hardliner toward the north. But that can be, of course, stimulating the Pyongyang. But at the same time, they need to maintain or kind of stabilize the situations too. So probably they also. They don't want to go too far either. I think that's one thing. And if if they go too far, again, certainly the upcoming new government gonna take more hardliner policies. So that can result in unnecessary, how would you say, those escalation of all this kind of verbal or even physical violence or even arms race over the Korean Peninsula. I don't think that's what Pyongyang wants to have either. So, well, those kind of remarks are just remarks, but at the same time, they have been consistently trying to strengthen their delivery capability, which is what we need to be very, very careful too.
Right, and speaking about that, Professor Kim, there is strong belief that North Korea may engage in further acts of provocation this particular month as it celebrates the birth of the country's founder, Kim Il-sung, on April 15th. Do you share this outlook?
Oh, sure. I think, Kim Jong-un, I think, is, ready to go on with military provocations. Maybe April 15th might be possibly the date of another nuclear test. We don't know what it would be. Because North Korea now, in these, fierce U.S.-China competition is on the side of China. In China, North Korea is very well bolstered. We know that after ICBM test, the United Nations Security Council, China was on the side of North Korea. So North Korea knows that, even though it does, some provocations, military provocations, that crosses the red line. North Korea knows that for China, what is more important is North Korea-China relations, as U.S. bashes China rather than denuclearization of North Korea. So I think of heightening the military provocations level. I think Kim Jong-un will try to deliver a very strong message to the United States and South Korea that these kinds of military provocations with ICBMs and nuclear weapons is really a substantial threat to the United States. So you need to change your policy towards North Korea. That kinds of clear messages to Biden government will be delivered by Kim Jong-un, I think.
Right. And Professor Im, as mentioned by Professor Kim earlier on, the incoming Yoon administration has spoken about the importance of, or the need that is to pursue a comprehensive strategic alliance with Washington, one that covers broader economic and security agendas beyond simply North Korea matters. Having said that, what do you envision?
Well, I think we can get some hints from one article written by the President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol himself. He published that article through the Foreign Affairs, and he suggested a kind of new vision for the South Korea's role in the global affair, and he used the term again, global pivotal state. So, South Korea, of course, used to be one of the poorest or weakest countries in the world, but now as economic power, of course, is one of the kind of, top 10 richest country in the world. And not only just, that kind of economic power, South Korea has a soft power too. And we have many those, how to say, kind of know-hows or skills, professional experience for so-called governance, democratic governance. So I also do think, South Korea's those kind of administrative experience can provide many important lessons or implications for other countries as well. And another thing is, if you see today's those international affair, as we cannot separate some issue from another. Again, the military issue is one. It used to be one, and an economic issue was another. But now everything's are pretty much, everything is intertwined. So it's very hard to separate economic issues from the security issue. So having had all these kind of complicated situations, probably South Korea's former approach, which was more like a pragmatic or kind of two-track or multiple-track approach, might not be that valid any longer. So I do think that the new government also recognizes all this, kind of changes situations. So that is why I think they suggested that kind of concept, again, global pivotal power. State, I'm sorry.
So a shift in strategy is necessary then. Professor Im, the head of Yoon's US delegation, Park Jin, and his deputy, Cho Tae-yong, are considered strong candidates for the post of foreign minister. What can you tell us about their potential foreign policy directions?
Well, both they started their careers as the career diplomats. We all know they are very knowledgeable, not only just knowledgeable, they experienced all those diplomatic, affairs and foreign affairs for very long years. So I respect their kind of, very rich and deep experience. And, of course, both they are now elected, politician, but not only just being a politician, at the same time, again, as I mentioned, they have a very rich knowledges and experiences in the foreign affair. So I think both can be pragmatic too and rational too in the field of those international affair.
I see. And Professor Kim, late last month, North Korea test launched an intercontinental ballistic missile, breaking a self-imposed moratorium following a similar test back in November 2017. What has been shared about North Korea's missile capabilities?
I think the Mark Milley, who is the chief of staff in the United States, mentioned that the House Military Committee at the House that it's a very substantial threat to the United States mainland. Already, other missiles have been deployed in North Korea, which can target the Guam. So at this time, if this missiles developed and deployed in North Korea, this will be really a substantial threat to the United States. So I think this will definitely change U.S. posture in this region, and also bolster the trilateral mechanism amongst the U.S., Japan, South Korea in security terms, which I don't think will be something that is happy to China, which I think ultimately be more getting along with the North Korea. So I think North Korea knows all these kind of environmental changes, which also can be another pressure toward China to support North Korea. But we'll see how it goes. But North Korea definitely has a lot of calculations in this kind of game.
I see. Professor Kim, this is an impromptu question, but against this particular backdrop that you've drawn for us, the Yoon administration is seeking the redeployment of US strategic military assets such as nuclear bombers and submarines here in the country. How does this plan look to affect cross-border ties, do you think?
This kind of thing is that Biden government's North Korea policy is now finally gearing towards a deterrence-based and sanction-based management of the Korean Peninsula, because I don't think Biden wants to take too much time and efforts in this Korean Peninsula. Its main target, the only target is China and the Taiwan Strait. It did not involved in the Ukraine war. It moved its boots out of Afghanistan. So I think as far as the North Korea issues, U.S. is just trying to manage North Korea so that it will not harm the U.S.-South Korea alliance. It will not harm the South Korean people and soldiers in the South Korean territory. But what I'm worrying about is that if these kinds of pressures and deterrence by the United States might think Kim Jong-un think differently and wrongly. Calculations of Kim Jong-un might think that, oh, this will be such a big horror for Kim Jong-un, might have to choose something else, some kinds of military provocations that crosses the red line, which can harm the people in South Korea. That's something that I'm worrying about. But I think the U.S. policy position is very clear to manage North Korea so they would not do something stupid.
Right. Professor Im, what are your prospects now with regard to cross-border ties under the Yoon administration, and what do you propose with regard to Seoul-Washington collaboration to ensure perhaps peace and stability here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, today's international affairs are very complicating. It's all mixed. And the crisis in Ukraine, again, Russia's invasion to Ukraine, it stimulated many different countries, such as Germany, for example, or like Japan, or even Taiwan. All this, economically speaking, they are all rich and very, very powerful. But they have looked back, how ready they have been for any of those kind of unexpected threat from the external player. So having said that, there are so many volatile situations these days all around the world. So my new government, I hope the new government can be smart enough not to, stimulate or not to trigger unnecessary escalation of violence or arms race. Of course, deterrence capability is very important for our national security, but how to make a good balance between the two different things will be required, I think, for the new government.
Right, and keeping in mind what Professor Im has said, Professor Kim, what is your forecast of inter-Korean ties over the next 5 years, and how can Seoul and Washington work together to perhaps ensure regional security?
Inter-Korean relations, I think the foremost expectation we can have is to manage the relationship so that something bad would not happen. What I'm happy about is that US and South Korea this time is ready to bolster the alliance. Alliance is something that we have to bolster so that we can get a lot of benefits from international community, not only security, not only military, but as Biden government's core of its Indo-Pacific strategy is global supply chain, which can be a very big benefit for a lot of business firms in South Korea. But one thing we have to keep in mind is that this bolstering and strengthening alliance issue would not devastate the South Korea-China relationship. That's something we need to think hard, so that because the U.S.-China competition is now zero-sum game, bolstering U.S.-South Korea alliance definitely have an impact on the South Korea-China relations. That's something we have to keep in mind.
Right, and if that being said, then what are your prospects on Korea taking a place perhaps in the Quad security framework, as mentioned by my colleague Sung-yeon earlier on?
A Quad is not a security mechanism anymore. I mean, that was the idea during the Trump government. But Biden's Quad idea and what is going on about Quad is just global supply chain issues on a lot of issues like new technologies. And even though South Korea becomes a member of Quad, that doesn't really is a big, matter for China. China is sensitive about the military threats by U.S.-South Korea alliances and other multilateral grouping in this region. But South Korea joining a Quad, which is aiming at cooperation on new technologies and climate change issues, I don't think that is a big deal for China either.
I see. All right, Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights today. Professor Im, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts as well.